Okay, so let's get started in the interest of time. We're a little bit behind schedule, but we will catch up. And keep in mind, you can always email me at jennifer.lewis, two N's in Jennifer, Lewis, at usm.edu if you have additional questions. And I'm glad to supplement the content. So some of it we'll have to go through a little bit quickly because it's a lot of information. So you might ask yourself, why is Assistant Director of Compliance and Ethics interested in accessibility? Well, I'll be honest with you, our institution is kind of at the beginning of an accessibility journey. And so what we've been trying to do is work on our website first and foremost, but there's a lot of components to accessibility. So we haven't actually assigned an actual person to handle this. So as a result, as assistant director, I get things that aren't assigned to a particular individual. And accessibility is one of those things. So that's how I came to be in this role in terms of having to learn about accessibility and how to make things accessible and what the requirements were. Okay, so we're going to discuss today some key terms. I want you to understand the 4 WCAG principles, the success criteria for the 12 guidelines, and to increase your awareness of accessibility concerns, because the Office of Civil Rights is monitoring things both on a K-12 as well as a higher education level to see that we're making things so that people who are struggling with an issue are not left behind, basically. And we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So what is the scope of this in terms of how many people are affected? There's some real startling statistics. In terms of the volume of content, there's 380 new websites created every minute. So if you can imagine that much content, and a lot of it is not accessible, by 2020, we're going to have 16% of people over 65. So that's going to be some low light and vision issues for them. There's also 15% of people worldwide that have a disability, or 1 billion people. And one of the big things that you'll see in accessibility is not just considered, a nice to have or good to have. It's more like a must have. It's actually considered by the United Nations a human right. So in the U.S., 26% of U.S. citizens have some type of disability. And you'll see it's broken down to mobility, cognition, independent living, hearing, vision, self-care. So not all of those necessarily are going to be web accessibility issues, but a lot of them are. And so the goal here is to make things as accessible as possible. So what is accessibility? Again, we're looking at making things equal, a level playing field. With educational institutions, the goal really is that the knowledge that the institution is trying to imbue to everyone should be accessible to everyone without any type of limitations. So given that there is technology out there, a good faith effort to implement that technology is really the focus of the Office of Civil Rights. So some of the cases we'll talk about, they just didn't do anything, or they took the lowest possible way of doing things. And I'll explain that a little bit later when we get into the case law. But fully, equally, and independently, so that people who have a disability are able to access to the same degree as other individuals, effectively and equivalently easily used. So you want to provide equal opportunities, and that's why we're calling it a right, because it's one of those civil rights in terms of equal opportunities to educational benefits. So what are the benefits of accessibility? Well, it allows integration across a variety of platforms, from a small screen to a tablet to one of these smartwatches. It also makes things function better. So if things are constructed in an accessible manner, they tend to use less bandwidth, and so they tend to load quicker. Basically, the amount of memory that's needed and how long it takes to process things is less, and so things appear to be many of you remember this when we used to have the internet and it used to be very, very slow. We would have that thing where it would just sit there and load. Well, that's what we're trying to avoid, because when the computer cannot process information, that's what it'll often do. It'll just get stuck in its thought process, and that is what we're trying to avoid, because that is not equal access. From a consumer standpoint, you're trying to increase the awareness and access to everyone to having the same availability of information. It also is required by law under the ADA and some other laws we're going to discuss. And also, it's really important that we know that ethically we want to be socially responsible and provide people the ability to get what they need in terms of the content that we're providing to our other students. So, who determines the standards? The standards are not determined by a government agency. They're actually determined by the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C. It's an international group of accessibility experts. You've probably seen the WCAG standards on their website, but they are not a government entity. They're just the subject matter experts on this, and they do a lot of testing and work with focus groups and, in fact, with the National Federation for the Blind as well, to make sure that what they're doing kind of keeps abreast of the fact that there's continuing technological developments that make it easier to make things accessible. So they're not very static, and they continue to evolve. In the last year, they went up from 2.0 to 2.1, so they continue to monitor things and try to make things better. So the WCAG principles, they're really 4, and it goes into the acronym of POUR, so perceivable. You want to make things so people can really understand what's going on. And so you have to think about it that if I can't see and I'm relying on a screen reader, what is it that the screen reader can see? So one of the problems that you'll see when you're trying to make things accessible, especially on the web, is that a lot of times the systems don't require you to put the alt text. So people will not put the alt text. So if you have a screen reader and you get to an image without alt text, for you, that image doesn't exist. So it makes you lose the content as well as the context, because you're left, there's an image, but that's all you know, and you have no information about the image. Which brings to mind one of the bigger things is the when you have those process diagrams, those Visio diagrams, and people will PDF those and put those out there. Well, again, without words, or putting something that says just diagram a process, that's not going to be inadequate, because that's what your screen reader will see, and that doesn't give you any type of content or context as to what is actually in that image. And that's those type of things that you need to think about as you're looking at accessibility. Transcripts. There are some free transcription embedded in some of the social media things, such as YouTube and Vimeo, but the accuracy is low. It's around 80-some%, which seems high in the relative comparison to 100%, but is not. And in fact, if you go to YouTube and look in there and type something like accessibility and issues with YouTube videos, there's some examples there showing how far off 80% can be. Like it's almost like it's a different language it's speaking, because there's just things that make it almost nonsensical. You also want to present it in different ways, but in the right order. And that kind of speaks to the tables. You know how when you're looking at a table, you're reading it and it makes sense to you. But if you can't see it, imagine that you don't have the directions to tell the reader to go down and right, or down and, continue down. The context is not there without those extra tags and information. So you have to try to make all those considerations in mind as you work through designing the website. So like for us, we try to, initially we tried to avoid tables, but now we have a system that actually puts in some code for us. So you want to make sure those types of questions are things that you ask from vendors. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you would vet vendors who are going to be helping you with making things accessible. But that's one of the things. Are the tables going to be accessible? Because that's the big thing. A lot of things are best presented in tables. But if they're not accessible, that's, worthless for a very large group of people. And those are the types of things the Office of Civil Rights will look at when they do an analysis of your systems. You also want to increase ease of viewing and hearing. And in terms of color, one of the big things is don't use just color for meaning. So don't turn a word green and then not explain. Again, you're going to have to really rely on some more information in terms of alt tags, or maybe like a parentheses afterwards that says the word to the left is green, indicating its importance, or something that adds that information. Again, you have to think about what the reader can't see. If the screen reader is just going what's on the screen and it can't see, the person can't see color. So it's kind of like putting yourself in their shoes to try to understand what we'll be missing. The keyboard functionality and operability. A lot of people can't use the mouse, so you're looking at some keyboard functions that they could say, basically. So you're trying to provide a multitude of ways of accessing information. You don't want to time out things. One of the things that they will talk about a lot is forms. In forms, you want to make sure you give adequate instructions as to what you want within the form, but also that you don't have a timeout. Because if people are filling things out with a screen reader software to assist them, it's going to take them more time. So if you say in 5 minutes, if this person doesn't complete this form, close it out, then you've basically put them right back at the beginning, and that's obviously not equal ease of access. Blinking and flashing, I don't think most people use blinking and flashing on their websites. If you're like me, you did use that way back in the day when the internet first started. We used to have scrolling things across the way. And if you go to the Wayback Machine, if you've ever seen that, you can look at old sites from the 80s and I guess it was the mid-90s actually. It feels like the 80s, but the mid-90s, and you'll see things like that. But that is very bad, especially for people that have some cognition issues as well as lighting issues. And, we've always been, I think, since that time been told not to use it as much because of seizures and things that it can cause physically on certain people. Site maps. I thought it would go out of style, but it actually has a use beyond what you might see, because for an individual who has a deficit, they need software to accommodate their issue. A sitemap can help them because then they can navigate using that sitemap instead of having to go by the menus, and that makes it easier for them. They can tell the software to take them to the sitemap and then use that sitemap instead. So it makes them have a little bit more flexibility in how they access the information. Understandability. If you're looking to try to make it, I don't know if you've ever heard this saying, but you want to keep things in a 5th or 6th grade level. You're not trying to use a bunch of fancy words or acronyms. If you're going to use acronyms, make sure that you state out what it is, because just because I know what GDPR means doesn't mean that everyone else knows what it means. And that's one of those things you kind of have to look at as you're moving forward to make it friendly so your external content is understandable to individuals who don't work in your institution. Understandability also in navigation. So certain things should be in certain places in terms of if you're clicking on something and it's supposed to be forms, then you expect a list of forms, or you expect something that pulls out into forms. So kind of logical. If something doesn't make sense to you, it's also not going to make sense to the software. Keep in mind that software is very linear, and I'll give you an example of what I mean. I have an Alexa device, and I talk to Alexa, and if Alexa can't answer me, for some reason, she'll either say, I don't understand you, because she can't think to go in a different direction. It's just very, very linear. Or she'll say something completely wrong. And that's how the screen reader works too. It's going to go in the direction it can go if it feels comfortable, that you've conveyed enough information. If not, it will just not work. And so that person will be left with the inability to understand what's on the screen. To them, the screen will be blank, or whatever facet they've gotten stuck on will not be presentable to them. Form field labels, user-friendly error messages. You're going to want to really be detailed in what you're letting people know if there's an issue. So if you want first name, don't just put name, put first name, last name, last name. If you're looking for something specific, like you're looking for a user ID at your institution's web email address, you'll need to put that in there and put an example. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to populate that field correctly for you, and you're not going to get accurate data, but they're not going to understand why it's not working. You're also going to want to look at, and this is more from a developer standpoint, they want the coding to be there, the HTML coding. So in the future, when the information presented in that web page has to be moved from one system to another one, like we just did, you don't have a lot of issues. If it's done correctly in the first place, it takes more time, but then if you need to move to a different system, you're able to do so without a bunch of issues where things just don't match up. And that can be a big thing if you're looking at a large scale thing. We have probably maybe, I don't even know how many pages. Someone told me one time, but it's a humongous amount of pages. And just imagine you have to go into each page and make those corrections. So it's better to invest the time on the front end. So again, the standards that we're talking about are twofold. WCAG 2.0 is the one that was passed in December of 2008, and it is in effect. It's typically the one that's used by the Office of Civil Rights. And I'll explain why that's important later. But generally speaking, what's happened is the Office of Civil Rights didn't pass anything. They've just, every settlement they've entered into, they've asked people to go and get like a consultant and get their content up to WCAG 2.0 standards. So an important thing I want you to consider as you're looking at accessibility and the cost of accessibility is that if you undertake accessibility, it's going to be much cheaper for you and your in-house staff to figure it out, maybe get some consultations, than if you're told you have 6 months to do it and you're going to have to pay. Because most of the settlements that you'll see from the Civil Rights Office do require a person to be hired, and they give you a very finite timeline, and you're going to pay a premium. So honestly, you're in better control, and it's more cost effective if you undertake these actions yourself. And with whatever consultation you need, it's just night and day in terms of the pricing, honestly. So WCAG 2.1 has been passed. It was passed on June the 5th of 2018. It is available in terms of a VPAT. And a VPAT's the agreement the vendor fills out and lets you know how they're going to make things accessible so you can understand if they can really meet the standards. But one of the problems that you're going to see is a lot of vendors are not WCAG 2.1 compliant because it is relatively still recent. And from a coding standpoint, they may just not be there. So a lot of people are just going for WCAG 2.0 AA, and I'll explain the level shortly. But that's important to know what standard your vendors can meet. If you're hiring someone, they have to be able to meet that, and that's what that VPAT is for. The standards also include additional requirements related to mobile accessibility, low vision, and people with cognitive and learning disabilities. That's a 2.1 standard, so as a typo. So that's the difference in terms of this. So the 2.1 standards include the 2.0 standards, plus they also have the requirements, additional 2.1 requirements on accessibility for phones, low vision, because that's become a big thing. As your eyes get older, as you can see from these glasses, the vision and the clarity with which you can see things without enough light becomes lower and lower, and then you need more contrast. And that's one of the things we mentioned before. Contrast is very important. And then we have more people with cognitive and learning disabilities. We're trying to give them equal access as well. So if you look in 2.1 WCAG, you will see the 2.0 standards plus these additional 4 elements. So let's talk about the success criteria. There's actually a checklist here. For the 4 core principles, there's 12 to 13 guidelines, and it's too much to cover in the time we have left. It would take a long time, but I just wanted you to see the link here and see if the form will come up. And so you see it explains to you, this is 1.1 non-text content, level A. And so then it starts talking about short text alternatives for situation A. So it kind of goes one by one. If a short description cannot serve the same purpose and present the same info as the non-text content, a chart or diagram. So that's the thing. When you use a chart or diagram, you have to have words behind that, because if not, you're putting the person in a position of not being able to see the information. Because if all it says is chart included, obviously that is not the information that your chart contained. So you're going to have to somewhat, and it seems awkward, but duplicate what you put in the chart in a way that the person can understand what's going on, because otherwise the chart will just be completely outside of what they can go over. Okay, so there are 3 levels. Level AA, it provides basic accessibility plus some additional guidelines. That is the recommended level based on the OCR settlements. They've always asked for a level AA. And I'm just going to be honest with you, in the soon to near future, I expect they will go to 2.1 AA, but I haven't seen a settlement with that in there. But it'll be like overnight. And it won't matter that Section 508, which we'll discuss shortly, only requires, 2.0. The reality is whatever the Office of Civil Rights does in those settlements, that's really your guideline. Because when they come to call and knock on your door and say, we want to audit you, we have a complaint, and someone says there's an issue, they're going to ask you to meet whatever they're stating. regardless of what the other laws say. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. So I always like looking at some of the cases so you can kind of see the way that the Office of Civil Rights handles these matters. So UC Berkeley got in trouble because they did not close caption their online videos. Now, I did mention that YouTube does have free closed captioning, and it's relatively easy to do. It automatically does it for you, and then you really need to go in and correct it. And if you want to find out more about that, you can definitely do that in YouTube. You can just Google how to make captions for accessibility on there, and it will tell you step by step, because I've used those instructions, and it's very simple. But what they did is they didn't close caption them at all. They didn't even do the auto captioning, and as a result, they got in trouble for that. And they were Department of Justice, which is the office that oversees the Office of Civil Rights, was basically saying that the content was not made available to the public it was made available to the public without accessibility. So now what they did is they moved all their content behind a firewall and said, we were providing this free to the general world because it was all on YouTube. So now we're going to move it out of YouTube and put it behind a firewall where you have to log in. So that way you can't get to it and we're not exposed. Short term, they haven't, had any big issues in terms of that, but long term, that's not going to be acceptable. The solution cannot be that. And so they're in the middle of still struggling to come up with a solution and make things more accessible. And one of the things that they will have to address is this, because you can't basically say, okay, the way we solve this is putting this behind a firewall. Because even the students that they have who get the content within their content management system are getting inaccessible content. And some of the case law has come down in terms of the fact that you can't just make things available on an as-needed basis. But the problem here is, from a financial standpoint, a lot of institutions are still doing that. People request things to be made accessible rather than automatically making things accessible. And that's a culture change that we as institutions are going to have to undertake. But that is something that's going to be definitely addressed if the OCR comes knocking or writing you a note to let you know that you have a complaint. That's one of the things they're going to ask you to do, to make things accessible across the board, not just based on some kind of request. The Harvard one was one of the many suits or complaints by the National Association for the Deaf. And they have been going through the websites one by one of big institutions to start with, and kind of looking to see what deficits there were and reporting those and filing suit. So you see that captioning exists on content posted on or after January 2019. So one of the things that these settlements have worked on is saying, hey, we know that we have old content that is not accessible. But to make things work from here forward, that's our commitment. So we start from here forward, make everything accessible going forward. And then we come up with a plan that says things in the past we'll address so that we have everything done, within 2 years or something like that. And then they also have a system, because they do have content that's not going to be immediately accessible. They have a process, providing caption content for any non-caption content for within 5 business days. So those are things that you want to think about. And if you look at these settlements, honestly, if you're going to draft a policy on accessibility or develop your own internal process on accessibility, these are probably the best way of determining what's important to the Office of Civil Rights and how to avoid an issue with them. Because if you come back to them and say, well, I did what you recommended here, that's going to be impressive and considered a good faith effort by them, rather than you saying, well, I was thinking and it didn't make sense to me, so I just did X, Y, and Z. If you substantiate why you did things based on these types of settlements, that will help you close out your cases quicker if you get any complaints with them, and help them to see that you are making a good effort, thereby avoiding not only the fact that you would have to make things accessible very quickly and at a costly premium, but also any type of fine they might impose. So you see on here, they're really doing a lot of monitoring. Got a report every 6 months, and their reporting is to the NAD, so to the Association for the Deaf, and to the Disability Law Center. And they've got to track all the requests they receive and any policy changes. But in the meantime, they have established a new policy, and you see right here, they're going to be the first ones to go WCAG 2.1 level AA. They've got a steering committee on accessibility, and they're committed, and then you'll see the accessibility statement that we'll talk about later. They're committed to making the university websites conform to policy, as well as education training of individuals. So that's another facet. When you have this policy, one of the things that is recommended is that you have a training arm, but that does require a person. So for our institution, we haven't really implemented that piece yet, but that will, until we assign an actual person to handle it, probably be me, because I function with regard to other training elements. But those are just things to kind of give you some guidance. I've also got some links here to all types of accessibility lawsuits, regardless of whether it's physical or not, because remember, the ADA also covers buildings. There's higher education lawsuits, digital accessibility blog, and he covers things that are kind of coming up in the forefront. Then we also have the enforcement actions with the Americans with Disability Act. So if you click on that link, you'll see where they're trying to specifically settle those. And it's different, like here's Starbucks. And you'll see big companies like that, because again, this covers both institutions that are public as well as retail organizations, anything that's open to the public, the city of New York, Harris County, Texas, medical centers. So those are the kind of institutions that you will see. And they are, like I said, the disability organizations have been doing a pretty good job of going through and figuring out who is not in compliance and reporting that in terms of filing a suit. Okay, so the laws. We mentioned the Americans with Disability Act of 1990, the ADA, which most of us have heard of. So Title II, it prohibits discrimination against disabled persons who participate in programs for which an institution receives federal financial assistance from the Department of Education. So that is, usually higher education institutions as well as K-12. Title III is public accommodation. So that's going to be hotels, restaurants, gyms, Starbucks, the hospital more likely, health clubs, stadiums, movie theaters. So Title II, again, is going to be your educational institutions or anyone that gets government funding. And then you've got Title III, which is everybody else. So no one is immune or impervious from being scrutinized in terms of their ability to comply. Now, Section 504 is basically a statement about no qualified person with a disability shall be excluded from participating in or obtain the benefits of or subjected to discrimination under any program or activity under which federal financial aid is received. So again, we're not allowed to discriminate, and we're supposed to provide them with the benefits that they are entitled with. Let me put do not disturb. Section 508 is the one that you'll often see quoted. That is the one that's still under 2.0 AA. It really is for electronic information technologies for the U.S. federal government, but schools and higher education institutions have adopted 508, so you'll often see that referenced. But again, the problem with that is kind of misaligned with the OCR settlements, because they're moving to, right now they're still the same, but you're going to start to see 2.1 AA here and 2.0 and AA in 508. So again, always go to the side of looking at what the Office of Civil Rights is doing, and you'll want to continue to monitor that because that's ever changing. Other important documents, there are some Dear Colleague letters, and they just talk about opportunities and engaging in the same interactions, and they're basically stating this is the bottom line, the basic things that you must provide to the students. They've got to be able to get this information, the same as your sighted students. Now, this is the part I was mentioning before. If accommodations are only available at certain times, they're not equally effective. So really, and this would be the case for many institutions, if we're only offering things, and generally speaking, because we're not going to make anything accessible, we're going to say you have to request it, and then what if you have to do something tomorrow, you need this content, you can't get it that quick, then we have a real big problem. That's why making things accessible completely based on a request process that requires 5 days doesn't work for everything. The settlement with Harvard is saying things that they haven't quite gotten to, they'll get to in 5 days. But you can't say that's our plan, everything is by request, because that would be inadequate based on that Dear Colleague letter. Why is it important? You're looking at delivering information exclusively by electronic means to many different people. So there's a high potential for inaccessibility, especially with websites that have graphics, websites that have pictures that without alt text, PDFs on websites. There's been issues, especially with low lighting on the devices such as Kindles, apps that are inaccessible, and then learning management systems. And I'll give you an example of learning management system. For instance, we use Canvas. Canvas doesn't automatically do anything for you to make things accessible. So a professor can link to a video in YouTube that is not captioned, and it doesn't caption it for them or tell them that it should be captioned. PDFs can be uploaded, just a PDF, and there's nothing in there that even says, hey, don't forget it should be accessible, or here's a tool that integrates with Canvas to make things accessible. I've kind of been disappointed that it really isn't going in that direction. There's other things that it's been missing as well, like it doesn't generate certificates. So it is a much cheaper version than Blackboard. So I don't know really what Blackboard had because we weren't using it in that way before we got rid of it. I don't know if there's add-ons that you can buy for Canvas, and that's something that we're going to be examining in the future, because we do have a lot of places where people can just put content up that are professors that we wouldn't know is inaccessible, because we don't audit that either. And we don't have a specific person designed to cover accessibility either. So again, those are some risks that you will find. What are the consequences of failing to make content accessible? Legal costs beginning at $75,000, and that's based on previous fines from the Department of Justice, which oversees the Office of Civil Rights. A resolution agreement, again, you're going to have to spend money because you have to get this accessibility done quick, and you're going to have to hire a consultant. You're going to hire that consultant at a premium. The worst part, honestly, is the loss of eligibility for financial aid under Title II. So you are subject to that if they feel like what you've done is so egregious, especially if, you would refuse to enter into the settlement agreement. Because really, my understanding is that most often once they come to you and they give you the information and you provide an extensive amount of documents, I can tell you from experience, to substantiate why you think things are accessible, then they come back to you. The goal is really to enter into a settlement agreement and figure out how to get this number real low, avoid loss of eligibility entirely, and to try to get as much time so that the time frame isn't so short that you pay the highest premium, or that you've done enough so you're not so pressed for time that maybe you could even handle it. But often they don't give you a choice if they do ask for a consultant to be hired. Is there one standard? Well, the Section 508 refresh that occurred results in the standard of WCAG 2.0 AA, like I said, and that's per the Transportation Board, which is the overseer of that law. They were actually supposed to revisit this and look at whether or not they wanted to do something different, and both they and the Department of Justice haven't really done anything, and so that's really the biggest problem. We have a lack of continuity in terms of addressing this. Lawsuits, again, are WCAG 2.0 AA, but we're starting to see 2.1 AA come in those settlement agreements, and that's the direction they're going to go in relatively soon because it's been a little while. Department of Justice could pass its own regulation. They've been considering this since 2010, so it's only been 10 years. So I'm thinking that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. But there's been a multitude of suits against school districts, community colleges, and universities in the meantime. What types of situations lead to complaints? Either failing to caption videos, like not even turning on the auto caption in YouTube, or not correcting them and leaving the 80%, because that would be inadequate too, because we know there's significant meaning deficits that you'll see if you go into YouTube and look up some examples of that. Failing to caption college sporting events announcements, that's also using inaccessible devices such as clickers and readers. Implementing an inaccessible website, application, or learning management system, and using technologies materials that are inaccessible to screen readers. So one of the things I heartily recommend is that, we're going to talk about the VPAT, that you have that discussion with your vendors. Get them to fill out a VPAT. Ask a lot of questions so you can be sure that what you're creating and what you're signing up for is going to be accessible even if the standard goes up, and have a commitment from them that if the standard were to go up to 2.1 AA, how long is it going to take if they're only 2.0 AA to get from point A to point B, so that you're not put in a bad position as a result, because that really won't be an excuse in terms of the Office of Civil Rights, because they're going to ask you if you ask them, and then you have no, if you haven't had that discussion, then they haven't agreed to anything. And I would most definitely put that in terms of an upgrade or update within the terms of your contract to make sure that they abide by whatever they promise you. Because remember, and this is just a legal thing for you to know, but words mean nothing. It must be in writing, and it must be basically attached to the contract. It can't just be something that you say, hey, oh, we signed this document, but it's not referencing the contract, and it's not referenced in the contract. It's got to be in the original contract with that information. Otherwise, it doesn't really bind them to anything. So 2 paths to a lawsuit. A student with disability can file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights or the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, or OCR by themselves can find, for whatever reason, go to your site and look up stuff and see that it's not accessible and let you know. And they'll send you a nice letter to let you know what they found, that it's inaccessible, but they won't provide details. You will have to answer the questions that they're asking on the second piece of information once they send that to you, which is their discovery. And you won't actually know what it is they found. You'll just know the areas they found it in. So like you might get a letter that says, we have issues with your website and your learning management system, but it doesn't detail what those are. And typically, honestly, they have a big backlog. So your best bet is not to ask too many questions and keep on working on accessibility in hopes that you're at a better place by the time that they actually get back to you and provide more details. But they put you on notice pretty early, well in advance of actually letting you know the specifics of what they found. They basically just give you the area, learning management system, website. And you'll see that the National Federation of the Blind and National Association of Deaf are often the plaintiffs in these cases, and they'll file a lawsuit against you, and they'll be assisting basically OCR by having said, oh, well, we looked at the website and we found it inaccessible. Where does the DOJ rule making on accessibility stand? Again, they haven't done anything. The rulemaking actually was placed on inactive list in 2017. It was going to make an order in 2016, proposed rulemaking, and they put it out to the public, and public gives comment on what the rule they're going to put in there in terms of accessibility would be, but they never went any further. They issued a supplemental advance notice proposed rulemaking. They talked about they're going to talk about mobile apps and archive content and exceptions for password protected content. That's the thing about Harvard, see? So they were going to consider whether it's appropriate to allow an exception for password protected content. Or in other words, can you make things inaccessible if you're putting it behind the institution's firewall and requiring people to log in? And that is one of the things they were supposed to address within that May 9th, 2016 supplemental advance notice proposed rulemaking. But then they didn't do anything. They put it on the inactive list. So they haven't really said, but the risk is that they're going to say that it's not, because it makes no sense for it to be, because you would still owe the obligation to make it accessible to the people that are at the institution. Whether they can log in or not is just, it's not a real factor. Okay, so I wanted to go over real quickly some accessibility concerns, headings. If you see in a Word document, you'll notice that you have that part of the Word where it says like level H, it is H1. I think it just says like level 1, 2, 3, something like that. So those levels are important. So often you'll see people say, hey, make it in Word and then make it PDF so that those headings come over. So that's one of the philosophies, because that does let the screen reader know, this is the top level, this is the sub level, this is the next level. So it's the styles is what those headings are under. Tables have to have information if you're reading it top down to right or left to right or just straight down. That information has to be included, otherwise it won't make any sense to the screen reader. Again, you have to have both mouse and keyboard options for navigation. You have to format lists properly. So they must be formatted so that they make sense if the screen reader is reading it. Font is very important because you can't have too small font. You want to avoid underlining things, because then the The software will think that you're trying to hyperlink because that's what we consider, the key to hyperlinking is it's underlined, so don't underline things. You also do not want to use inconsistent fonts, so don't change font types all over the place. And that's for the people that have vision issues. And you also want to have contrast between the background and foreground colors. So that's one of those things. And I'll provide some more supplements on the colors because that's one of a specialty. We have a person here who has spent some time looking into that, but that's a very subspecialty. Usually software is where you look at that in terms of making those distinctions. Images, again, the alt text is essential. And I did provide you with a link at the end of the PowerPoint on working with more complex images, including mathematical equations. Because again, that's a subspecialty. You have to use special, not software, but different add-ins or options within the software to make it accessible. Links, you have to describe where the link is going. Colors, enough contrast. So do not use color to convey meaning. Don't make things green and hope that people understand, because the screen reader will not be able to communicate that without additional information from you. Navigation must be clear and consistent. So on the pages, consistently across all the pages. No blinking. Label your forms very detailed in order. Videos need to be closed captioned. Audio, provide audio transcript. Software, require only accessible software and applications, and that's where that VPAT is going to come in. And again, the equations, there's some information on the equations in that complex document that was referenced in the previous slide, but there are different things that you can use, and there's like an equation function even in Word where it brings a little box in and you type the equation, and that makes it accessible. But without using that, it will not be accessible. How do you determine if your technology purchases are accessible? You're going to use the voluntary product accessibility template, and it explains how products are accessible. It breaks it down to conform to the standards, so you'll be able to understand element by element what is and isn't accessible. And you can find that on this page, and keep that link, because when it gets updated, sometimes you won't hear for a little while, but this page goes directly to all of the VPATs. So you'll see if there's like a one for 2.2, that might also give you a clue that 2.2 is passed if you're not necessarily monitoring this, but I would monitor that site. This is a very big subspecialty, the IIAP certification. The certification actually provides you information and different levels, 3 levels. So if you're interested in that, it costs a bit, but the exam costs only $325 to $475, and you can get a discount there if you're a member of IIAP, which I think is like $500 or something like that. But your institution may be a member, so you'd want to check with that. But you'll see different levels, and like the top level is passing both exams. This one includes coding, the second level. So at least the first level, if you're interested in becoming a accessibility specialist, and you'll often see those jobs posted, that first level would make you like a superstar, because a lot of people have not gotten this certification yet. It's relatively new, but that would be adequate to get you a nice job. And a lot of if you're thinking about moving to the West Coast, a lot of the schools are looking over there in the Washington area, Portland, Oregon, California. They're looking for these folks. New York is also looking, but this certification would put you ahead of everyone else. So how do you achieve accessibility? Well, in addition to doing all the common things we mentioned before, you also want an accessibility policy. So I've included a sample policy, as well as this one from Washington. And basically you're going in here, it's got several links to different ones. And you can go to any particular one. Oops. And it's kind of broken down to sections. Who's affected, who you contact, what do we believe we're going to do, what are we committed to doing, how are we responsible, what are the specific terms, and any tools, forms, and then the history of the updates. So if you want to develop a policy or in the process of developing a policy, I recommend you look at these links and then look to see. What I do is I usually pull them all up and kind of come up with a pattern from that in terms of what the standard is. And it's very granular. So you're looking at covering everything one by one, and you're saying that you're, WCAG 2.0 level AA right there. That's the standard we're going to meet. So this policy is one of the things I'll be working on this fall. So if you have any questions or concerns, let me know. I can glad to share my experience with that. You also want to develop an accessibility statement. That really is going to be the easier thing because the policy is going to require buy-in from the stakeholders and your cabinet or your board of directors or board of supervisors. But an accessibility statement is basically just letting people know, hey, this is where we are on our accessibility journey. This is where we're going to get to. We're going to, from here forward, we're going to make everything accessible. We're going to work on, this is the plan for the pages we already have, how to make them accessible and how soon we're going to make it. And we're really committed to it. And who do you call with questions or concerns, which is the big thing. Because you want to make sure that someone is not left without anyone to contact, because the next thing that will happen is they will reach out to one of those federations who will file suit on their behalf, or the Office of Civil Rights will hear from them and you will have a complaint. So again, here's the sections of the accessibility statement. You have a commitment statement, how much you're committed to accessibility, your guidelines. Are you going to be WCAG 2.0 or 2.1 AA? Oops. And I will fix that typo. Exceptions. Older things can't be done overnight, so you want to put a plan in place how soon it's going to be that you're going to get the older things, and a process. So if someone needs older content made accessible, how do you do it? Who do they request it from, and how long it's going to take? And then, of course, you want to put in there who do they contact with questions, comments, an email, and or a phone number. I recommend both, honestly, because again, the phone may be the better solution for the person. And then helpful resources tend to be included. So I'll show you an example here. Hold on one second. Oh, actually, this one is not good. This is a tool that actually helps you generate the statement. So you can just click on that and fill out the answers, and it will actually give you information. And here's some sample accessibility statements. We don't have tools on here, I don't think. But this is ours at the top here. What are we doing? How are we doing? Well, yeah, I guess there's the tools. Examples, accessibility software. But I think the other one here, these are some planning statements. Oops. Let's see if it'll open. So this is just talking about what you want to put in here. You got a phone number, email. Here, they even put a postal address. Technical specifications. What are we doing? Limitations and how you're assessing things and valuing things. I know some people have also put on there that they're regularly going to have their content tested by software as well as by people. There's organizations that have people who are disabled who test for them. And so some people hire those organizations to be sure that it's been user tested to be accessible, not just tools. And I did want to include some tools in here. So you can see here, there's 16 tools, and this is a recent one. The top 16 tools recently. And then, of course, we did use this, and it was very, very, very good. It's called SiteImprove. And SiteImprove is actually a company that it provides you like a scan of all your site, and then it tells you what deficits you have in terms of accessibility, spelling, accessibility of your PDFs, and it's page by page. It also includes some training. It's not certification level training. I think they consider it certification for them, but that's not viable for any other things, but it is some training in terms of accessibility. And then, of course, there are several different other training options. There are some free webinars from DICU. If you sign up, you can go in there and look at archive things and get a very good understanding of accessibility as a whole. You can also go to this Teach and get some information there. We also have the IAP training, and then Level Access is a company that does training. And then Lynda was a separate entity, but it's now owned by LinkedIn, and they do have some training in there as well. But keep in mind, there's a lot of information available on YouTube that can train you on different elements of accessibility. In fact, I found something the other day, which is just explaining WCAG 2.1. So basically, it's only a matter of finding it on YouTube. And Bing also has like a search that you can do on Bing for videos that will give you that type of information. So today, I hope that you understood that basically the standard still is WCAG 2.0 AA, but it looks like we're moving to WCAG 2.1 AA soon. And we're starting to see those settlements illustrating that that will be the direction we're going in sooner rather than later. It's important to make content accessible, not just the content open to the public, because we don't know when that time frame is going to change, where they're going to make a decision and make it very clear that behind a firewall is not permitted, that you can't just say everything we have is locked up, the public can't get to it, so our people have to request it, and we're not going to do it as a whole. We're going to just have it as a request process. That is not going to be a long-term solution. So the problem with not doing anything is that you're looking at the issues with the cost of having to remediate things quickly, and you're looking at a fine. The reality is what you need to do is move slowly to do things and start getting a plan up in place. Accessibility statement first, accessibility policy second, hiring a web accessibility coordinator, get that person some IAP training if they don't have that. And the goal really is to start moving in that direction. So if you have to remediate things, you're not put in the untenable position of having to do so quickly at such a premium. So there's just a little bit of that broken down. And so I appreciate your time. And again, please let me know if you have any questions or concerns. And I will be doing the actual practical one next month. So that will go over Word, PowerPoint, and how to use Adobe to remediate, as well as some potential paid solutions or something that we're looking at that I thought I would share with you that I think may be a good solution. You're more than welcome to share that. And if anybody has any questions, let me know. Again, this is just if you're looking to go in a different direction, you like some technology, this is a very good direction from a career standpoint, because I'm seeing more and more of these positions posted. And if you're interested in that, I can give you the link to a webserve or listserv that has all those jobs that come to me, just saying how much is the demand for these type of positions, because there's not a lot of people certified or have this experience. Thanks so much, everyone. I appreciate it. Have a great Wednesday. Hopefully tomorrow will be sunny. Thank you for joining us.